Hey everybody, Mike here. And if it's okay with you all, I'd like to take a break from the real world and spend some time in the world of poker. Championship level poker. Because today we have a very special podcast guest, a bracelet-winning, high-rolling crusher on the Deuce to 7 scene. So get ready. We're talking post-draw play and more on this episode of The Mixed Grill.
Hey everyone, I'm Adam Miller. I'm back with Zack Jones and Mike Fraedrich for episode 6 of the Mixed Grill podcast. How are y'all doing?
Pretty good, Adam. Mike, how are you doing? Hopefully you're doing well as well.
Doing okay.
Excellent.
Good to see you guys.
Yeah, absolutely. We've got a pretty full house here, pretty stacked slate. Like Mike said, we've got a very, very, very special guest that will be joining us a bit later. As always, thank you everyone who is listening to us right now, everyone who is listening at some point in the future. We are, seeing everyone who's listening. We're seeing the numbers, and we very, very much appreciate all the listenership and the viewership. So that's very cool of you guys. Certainly let us know if we can do anything to improve as we continue down this journey. But like I said, since we do have such a pretty stacked slate in front of us, we are going to jump right into it. We're talking about post-draw play. And that is a mouthful, apparently. I can't even say that. Post-draw play today. And I'm actually going to start us off, as you probably guessed, talking about the very first draw. When opponents are drawing the same number as you, so you've gone through your pre-flop action, if you followed the podcast last week, then you know what that pre-flop action should be roughly, and you get to the first draw, you're going to want to bet, typically if you improve, and check if unimproved. It's a common error that players make. It's something that I have done, more than once. It just doesn't really make sense to bet when you don't improve on that first draw. Best case scenario is if you were ahead of your opponent before the first draw, then you're still going to be ahead by only a marginal amount, though. The worst case scenario, your opponents are going to improve. And then we're going to be opening ourselves up to putting in multiple bets as a large equity dog, and that's certainly not a position that anyone wants to be in.
Yeah, so there's not it sounds like there's not a lot of just blind C betting in Deuce like there is in Hold'em.
Right.
You really want to make sure you're ahead when you put more money in.
Yeah, exactly. This isn't the kind of case where I've got 2 overs, I've got backdoor spades. Let me just throw out a little bet-ski there on the flop. That is a recipe for disaster, folks. You don't want to do it. If, however, you do end up improving to a pat hand, then bet and raise as you can to get as much value as you can, and also to keep your lines the same for all of your pat hands. You certainly don't want to give anything away. You do want to have a little bit of deception there, but you also want to get value for the good hands that you have. So, we're not going to be improving to a pat hand and then checking. That's just not something that is going to be very conducive to us making money.
So no slow playing or trapping.
Yeah, it doesn't make too much sense to slow play or trap, because as soon as we trap with a pat hand, then our opponents will see that we're pat. So that trap ends basically on the next draw.
Right. The jig is up very, very quickly.
Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
That seems like a big lost opportunity, because sometimes when you pat, people will be like, oh, I'm dead, I'm out of here. Whereas if you can get a bet in before you pat, then they might think they have a chance still.
Yeah. The corollary with Hold'em is, let's say it's a 3-diamond board, you flop a flush, and you check call the flop, check call the turn. There are a number of hands you could have that aren't flushes there. It's not the equivalent of padding. In Deuce, you're pretty much saying, holding up a big neon sign saying, "Hey, guess what I have?"
Right.
And that's not good.
Yeah, we want to be avoiding that on all situations and all streets. All types of draws versus our opponents to draw, like, we don't want to ever hold up that neon sign that says what we have. And so I do think that's a common thing I see, like, in play. There's no communal cards. We have no, we can't see those 5 cards, but you'd be surprised how many times we can identify our opponent has these few hands. We know they have one of these few hands,
Yeah, that's a good point, because I even like the short time that I've been playing this game, if I see someone pat and then check, it's like almost always like a weak,
like a weak 9. Yeah.
Like I was thinking like a 9,
9-8, 9-7.
98, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sometimes a 10, like a 10-7 or something, but
and sometimes it's very player dependent. So you can see players that tend to play a little passively, and you kind of know they might even be doing this with like the 8-7-6 in spots where I would bet the 8-7-6. But yeah, it's just, you kind of know it's the weakest 8s and some 9s that they do this with. And yeah, we want to avoid that spot. And we also need to understand some spots we'll get into later where you could be missing value too, and you could have an equity advantage that you're not pressing, So yeah,
that's maybe a later street conversation.
Exactly.
Yeah, we could talk about that for hours. I'm sure we could talk about that for hours in Hold'em too. Just the lack of value in a lot of spots. But this ain't a Hold'em podcast, ladies and gentlemen. This is a Deuce podcast. Now, let's say that instead of drawing the same number of cards, you draw fewer cards than your opponents. Great. That's awesome. You're going to want to bet, because you are going to have, and correct me if this is not correct thinking, Adam, but you're going to have the advantage naturally with your range, just based on the fact that you're not drawing as many cards as your opponent is, and you're not going to want to, just like we were talking about with trapping, you're not going to necessarily want to give something away or bet based on the strength of your hand, and let your opponent see that and be able to adjust accordingly.
Exactly. Like, if we have a draw 1 and they draw 2, then we have an equity advantage. So we should be betting and pressing that advantage, and presuming that anything we presume is basically what we know, not what could be or what we're afraid of it being. So the most common thing that would happen is we're still in that same spot, 1-2, but it's equally likely that we could have improved to a pat hand. It's more likely they prove to a draw 1, but for us to not bet, we would be losing value versus a draw 2. And then if we split our range into still betting our strong draw 1s and not betting our weak draw 1s, then we're giving away information that we don't want to give away. So yeah, the equity advantage there is enough to press, and it's also, when it's incorrect or when you're behind, it's a small mistake, because it is the last small bet in the last small betting round. So you're not losing much by the times that you're behind or they've improved drastically.
And on the reverse side of that, when we draw more cards than our opponents, it's exactly what you think. We're going to want to check if we're out of position, as you'd probably expect, and we're going to want to act according to the action that we've seen. If we're in position and the betting comes back to us, this is probably one of the few times, that we are going to want to be more action dependent, more villain dependent. If we've improved, based on the number of cards that the other villains drew, then, we would want to bet. So it is still similar to, the rest of the first draw guidelines. It's just a little more variable based on position.
Are there many spots where we're going to fold after the first draw?
No, fold frequency would be super low. Something like 5%.
Wow.
Yeah.
Is that more tailored towards limit as opposed to like pot limit? Is it any different in pot limit?
Yeah, it'd be different in pot limit because you're generally going to follow like minimum defense frequencies or like a mathematical basis based on their bet sizing, but also it's hard to converge because you're going to have draw 2s, draw 1s, and pot hands, so you kind of naturally tend to call more with certain hands, but Yeah, the limit nature is definitely the reasoning why.
Kind of like we talked about last week. You're getting like way better odds with the limit game, and especially implied odds
Yeah, for sure.
with the small bet on after the first draw.
Yeah, you'll almost always be able to continue based on your MDF in most situations.
Yeah. So we can move on to the second draw and talk about some of that now. This street, things become a little bit more crucial on this street. As a general rule, now we'll cease to auto call bets and start folding our draw twos that don't improve. Snowing now becomes more of a consideration, and some of our lines will kind of need to have bluffs in them, or we won't be able to get paid off as easily.
So we're never snowing off on the first draw.
You will,
Rarely.
but it's very rare.
Okay.
So snows are definitely more prevalent on the second draw. The most common situation in the second draw is the 1-1 situation, heads up. When we say that, we mean that the out-of-position player drew 1 on the first draw, and the in-position player drew 1 on the first draw, and now we are proceeding with our turn betting. So the first, the large bet is now in play, and we're talking about the information that we have on our opponent when we say 1-1, or the situation. So when the out-of-position player bets, if they did not have the initiative in the spot, this is almost a pat hand. This should be a pat hand. And if they did have initiative before the street, so say they were the one who were the aggressor on the flop, then they should be doing this with their draw ones and their pat hands. Versus wider ranges, the in-position player can freeze, which this play is a deuce to 7 play where you would call and pat. So the theory behind that is that your hand is good or decent enough, but it's not super premium, so it's not really worth the 2-bet and getting exposed, and also it benefits a lot from your opponent's not breaking. So say you flat with a weaker pat 8 or your strong pat 9, then it's hard for the out of position player to know if you have a pat hand. The tendency is to think that you're still drawing 1, and they might pat with a 10, and then you've got them drawing dead with a 9 low or a strong 8. So that's a common play in this spot to be making. And it's also kind of range dependent, so you can even freeze like all your pat hands when you expect your opponent to have like a very strong range. So you would also want to value raise your 8-7-5-3-2 plus, so that's a number 11. So thinking in terms of absolute hand strength, so in this spot, that's what you want to be raising. All those hands are better. Well, that would be versus wider ranges. Versus stronger, tighter ranges, you would want to raise 8-6-5-4-2 plus in this situation, and definitely raising your 7 lows and strong 8s in most cases.
You raising any draws on this after the second draw?
Yes, so in a sense. So what you're balancing with here is you would want to raise your 7 low draws that have seen multiple key cards blocked. So like a 7-4-3-2 with a 2 discard and a 3 discard. The more wheel blockers, the better. And then you could also make this play with a 10 perfect, like a 10, like a 10-7, where you would raise the in-position player's bet, and where you could break your 10 low because you have a strong enough draw behind it, but you also could pat if they break, and which case you would be 60% favorite if they draw 1. So it kind of gives you a little flexibility and kind of mixes up your play and balances your value range. Jack lows in this spot are unlikely to be good, and your worst 10s are unlikely to be good. So that would be the trickiest part about this spot, is what to do with some of your weaker 10s, like that might have like a gut shot, but then also like if your opponent pats. So a lot of those you can kind of almost like call and play based on what your opponent does, but Yeah, that's going to be like the hardest hands to play in the spot. Those tens that aren't really very breakable. And you can even go against like tighter ranges and just fold these outright, not even call a bet. Especially when they don't have anything to draw to, like the underlying four cards aren't good enough to draw. So
yeah, I would think like against a tight player that those not good to break tens or even nines. Like if someone pats are probably going to be tough to keep playing.
yeah, and so a common situation is the out of position player will check and the in position player will bet. And this is pretty straightforward. So the in position player should just be very straightforward and bet all their pat hands. They're going to have a small frequency of low equity snows with wheel card blockers. But in general, this is just going to be pretty much pat hands. And this is a spot that I think that I see players play a little incorrectly, where they might check a 9 low. Mm-hmm. And I've got some equities that I just shared that are kind of a good demonstration of why you want to make sure you're betting in these spots. Mm-hmm. But the out of position player checks to you. If they check raise, it's very likely to be a pat hand. I mean, it is a pat hand for certain. But very often it's going to be a draw one. So you want to be betting definitely your 10 lows or better. And when your opponent is still drawing one with a 9, even your worst 9s, you're going to be a 70% favored. Some of your decent 10s, you're going to be a 60% favored. And then even a jack, this is kind of like the breaking point spot, is a jack is going to be a slight favorite even over a one card wheel draw. Sometimes it depends on what cards you're blocking. Like, so in this specific example, like you can see the wheel draw needs the 6, 8, or jack to improve and beat the jack 8. So they're holding 3 of their outs. But there would be some spots where the jack isn't holding the 8 or the 6, or like, the cards are still the same other than the jack. So not holding as many outs would be probably even money. Yeah, that spot's pretty straightforward.
That's interesting. Yeah, because I think I was actually in a similar spot to that earlier this week, where I had a jack and my opponent was drawing 1. And I think I bet after the second draw. They ended up getting there on me, but I guess I was slightly ahead.
Now, you mentioned check raised, Adam, being a sign of, obviously a pat hand. We're going to want to get rid of our weaker hands for sure, but would we still want to call? Like, what do you think would be the cutoff point? And I'm sure that's probably not a cut and dry answerable question, but, just in general, if we do, see a check raise, is that something where we're only going to want to continue with our very strongest hands?
So against tighter ranges, the cutoff is probably all your pat 8s, I would say, or maybe even 9 perfect is probably the cutoff. But against and it's also very player dependent. So like against weaker ranges or aggressive opponents who kind of make these plays prevalently, so from the out of position player's perspective, the check raise with an unbreakable 10 is a good line to take, because it really puts more pressure on your opponent's pat 9s, and it might entice them to break the pat 9. So you definitely want to be careful not to overfold in this spot. So some of those 9 lows are still very valuable. So yeah, against some wider ranges, the 97 is kind of the cutoff. Like your strongest 97s should still, you don't want to get bluffed off that, but definitely folding your 10s, like your unbreakable 10s that can break and draw to a 7, you can call and then draw to your 7. So I'll finish out this second draw with a multi-way spot. Yeah, so multi-way, size of the pot is very important. Very few freezes in this situation. Generally bet your strong 9 lows. when deciding to break or pat, it is correct to break the more out of position you are, as drawing dead is a costly mistake. The structure of the game inherently forces hands out of position to break more often. So thus, we're, in this specific part, you see the reason why position is so important. So when facing 2 bets cold, we are generally not getting the right price to call with our 7 low draws, only if like 10 bets are in. 8 low draws could be drawing dead. So in multi-way, if you're facing 2 bets in front of you, you're definitely folding your 8 low draws. In some rare situations, like when the pot is kind of bloated, you could call with your 7 low draws. You want to be check calling all your 9 lows. Oh, sorry, you don't. Check calling your 9 lows turns your hand face up. So we don't want to pat any 10 lows in this situation out of position unless we're if we're the in position player and we get to see if they both draw 1, then we can pat behind with the 10 low. So that's kind of the breaking points there in the multi-way spot. And if you really kind of think about that, it's quite different than the heads up spot. Yep. The breaking spots are very different.
I'll say real quick question here from Jeff in the chat. What do you mean by unbreakable?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad. So I can just obviously rattle on and stop me and ask those kind of questions, because definitely that stuff is like really good to talk about. But an unbreakable jack or 10 would definitely be a 7-6-5-4 or a 6-5-4-3 under the 10 or the jack, because you have an open-ended straight draw. But we still would consider like anything rough under it is generally unbreakable or too rough to break your hand. And so if there's a spot where you reasonably could have the best hand, you don't want to break to those gut shot straight draws or draws that make rough hands or worse hands. It's just not enough equity there underneath to realize, like, for you to get there. So like another example would be like a jack 7-6-5-3 with that gut shot. The only, your opponents likely have a deuce. So deuce is really the only card, and there's probably only 2, if you're lucky, 3 of them left. A gut shot, and then you would make a rough 8 if you broke this hand. So those are kind of what we're talking about when we say unbreakable 10s and jacks.
Makes sense. And what about, you said no freezes on this street? What are you talking about there?
On the 1-1 spot on the turn, a freeze is a play that your opponent bets and you have a pat hand and you do not raise them, you just call. So we say this a freeze because your opponent can't know if you have a pat hand or a draw 1. And it's kind of pretty common for them to assume that you're still drawing. And then, so they might stand pat with a weaker hand, and then you catch them off guard when you stand pat behind. And so they're kind of frozen. What hand do you have,
Right. Okay.
And like you said, that can only be in position, because obviously if we're out of position and we check our pat hand and then we pat right afterwards, out of position, it's going to be, again, the jig being up kind of concept pretty quickly.
Exactly. So
lots of cold weather in this game. You got snows, you got freezes. Man, I'm just shivering just thinking about it.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
I think that covers most, if not all, of the second draw. I believe all of the second draw, actually.
Yeah, that covered
that's
the
all
second
of it.
draw. Yeah.
We're all experts now. We know everything there is to know about the second draw.
Obviously, the third draw is the next spot. Very common situation, again, is the 1-1. Heads up, both players have drawn 1. This situation is the most opportunistic for bluffing. So this is where you'll see the most bluffs in the game. Many players overbluff this spot, though. It can be easy to get carried away because you're going to make so many pairs on the river and so many bad hands that sometimes players haven't constructed their range well enough to know what to do with some of these hands. But you want to be methodically building your range in this spot. The out of position players should have a polar strategy, mixing with leads that are bluffs and high value. And then they want to also be check raising with value in bluffs. Their lead bluff should be based on blockers. One of your like best candidates here is going to be like your 8-8-4-3-2 or your 7-7-4-3-2. And your check raise bluffs can be like a 6-5-4-3-2 with a 2 discard and a 3 discard, because those hands block value and then they unblock your opponent's bluffs. And that's kind of the key part, is you haven't seen any 8s or 7s, and these are hands that your opponent is likely to bluff with.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's definitely a very blocker-based situation where we definitely want to be bluffing with hands that have the best card removal and so that means they block our opponent's value. As the in-position player, we want to have a compressed range, which is basically just betting like some bluffs, and then our 8 lows, 9 lows, 10 lows, and even some jack lows can value bet here if they unblock villains' bluff catchers. So hands that would likely bluff catch are hands that have not seen 8s or 7s. Like those are going to be like our best candidates to bluff catch.
Good
that's
stuff.
That's kind of the spot
very,
there.
very good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it feels like this is there's a lot going on. We could probably talk about it for
a
couple hours.
So I've kind of scheduled here just the highlight spots, the more common spots, but there's a lot more spots than this.
Maybe to preview like future episodes, we'll probably be able to touch on more of those as we like go through some hand play. I know both of us have some sessions recorded that just as we go through and look at different hands, we'll be able to come across, oh, hey, here's an example of this.
Yeah, for sure. Like we'll definitely, I think next week we'll do a play and explain probably for the whole session and like a giveaway. And so we'll have, we'll kind of get into real deep, like exactly what our line should be in all those spots. So
yeah, we got our guest coming up.
Yeah, we got a guest coming up. Hey, Nick. Can you hear me?
How's it
Welcome
going?
to the show.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, I don't know what was happening with that.
That's all right. You're here now.
Yeah.
Good to
How are
see
you guys?
Hey, good, man. Welcome.
You got Zach
thank
here
you.
and Mike. I don't think you've met either of them before.
I don't think so.
I don't think
Nice to meet
so,
you guys,
man.
Zach and
It's a
Mike.
pleasure, dude.
Hey,
That's
Nick,
okay.
how you doing?
Good.
Looks like you lost a little weight.
Oh, yeah, a little bit.
You've been working out.
Yep. Yeah, not too much going on, so working on it.
Less poker, more working out?
Yeah, a little bit of poker, but yeah, a lot of working out.
What do you make of our little podcast we got going on here?
Oh, it's great. Yeah, well, I love talking mixed games. Not too much mix podcast. So yeah, it's great.
Do you like talking mixed games? Who do you love talking mixed games with?
Mostly I talk to you about it, Adam.
We didn't know what that answer was going to be. It's
No,
completely
okay.
surprising.
I think
Yeah, I
he was
don't
setting himself up for that one.
I don't think I even mentioned to the viewers we have the 2018 10K Deuce to 7 world champion on right now. So if you have any questions for Nick, put them in the chat. We'll get them out to him, and yeah, we'll learn from one of the best Deuce players I know. And really the reason I even play the game. I've told you that, right, Nick?
Yeah. Yeah, and it was actually when I started. I mean, I hadn't been playing that long when you and I first started talking about it. So, yeah, we kind of got into it similar times.
Yeah.
So,
for
so
sure.
what got you into it? I know you got Adam into it. What got you started?
Well, where I'm from in Texas and southern Oklahoma, originally, when I kind of got tired of No Limit, it was mostly PLO. And then 5-card high-low, Big O was really popular there. So kind of wanted to get away from No Limits and started playing those games. And then as I started coming to Vegas more, I got a little more into mixed games, which were a little more fun. So just try to jump into something other than No Limit, and it worked out pretty quickly. So it's really fun and easy to like something when it works out quickly. So yeah.
Yeah.
Adam said you're in Vegas right now. Is that right?
Yeah, I actually live in LA now. So last weekend I was here just to play a couple online things and did well online. So now I'm here just for yesterday and today, and then I'll be back next weekend, 2 weekends, because they're doing some. It's unfortunate No Limit, but they're doing some ring events online. So Yeah, it's only a 4-hour drive, so kind of back and forth every once in a while.
Awesome.
And then you
Is
played
the
you played
go
in
ahead,
them
Adam.
last week too.
Yeah, yeah, played a $500 PLO event and did pretty well on that. And they had some no limit events too that are decent. They're not as fun, but yeah, mostly just PLO events, and they have a couple '08 and PLO 8 and stuff like that.
So how long have you lived in LA then? You said you come from Texas originally?
Yeah, only since like the beginning of the year.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're working on opening a business there, but luckily I didn't start it before Corona happened because everything would have been shut down there. So moved there and working on starting a business there. And yeah, so only about 5 months. And I'm actually kind of back and forth in Texas because I actually have kids in Texas, so live in LA and go back and forth to Texas. So yeah, back and forth.
Very cool. Yeah, Texas has a very unique live scene. I've only been down there a handful of times, but the different poker scenes in different cities seem to be very unique from one another. You know, I played quite a bit in like the Dallas area and Frisco, and I think those rooms have since been shut down. But I've heard that Houston has a great scene. I've heard that Austin has a great live scene too.
Yeah, Houston had all the big clubs when they first legalized that, and they were kind of back and forth. That was never really my thing. But yeah, there were the legal clubs for a while, and then a bunch of them got raided, so they're kind of back and forth. And then there's big games and big home games in Dallas, but those are mostly PLO too, not too many draw games. But where I live in North Texas, the casinos in southern Oklahoma are only about hour and a half away. So Choctaw actually has really big tournaments there. They have 1 or 2 WPTs, like 3 circuits a year. So whenever they have big tournaments there, there's actually big draw games and really big PLO games.
So Adam talked about you playing and winning that 10K Deuce of 7. What got you up on that level? What was it? Taking a shot, or you've been working your way up to that? What?
It was actually kind of taking a shot. So 2017, I played my first 10Ks. I played 2 10Ks. I played 10K PLO, 10K PLO 8. And ran atrociously on the first ever 10K. I was PLO and had top set versus middle set and got it all in. And the guy went backdoor flush in my first ever 10K, so that was pretty brutal. And then PLO 8 was similar fashion. So that year I busted the first 2 10Ks I ever played. And then 2018, I started playing some mixed games, and the 10Ks, they actually started letting you register on day 2. So the first one, it was 10K stud high, and they were down to like, I don't know, 15 people. And I was like, man, I just really want to win a bracelet. There's no better shot than playing 10K stud high. So I'd never played. Hadn't actually even played 1,500 studs. So I played 10K stud high, registered day 2. By dinner break, I was 3rd in chips. And then after that, just ran atrociously. I cashed and made 1 page up in that. So after that, I was like, yeah, I'm going to play Deuce. So again, hadn't even played. I'd played a bunch of 8-game tournaments previously in the World Series, but hadn't even played 1,500 Deuce. Played 10K Deuce and won that one. But if I hadn't have cashed 10K stud, I probably would not have played 10K Deuce. So it was kind of just meant to be.
Nice. So you did that late reg again?
No, I don't think so. Maybe like a couple hours, but no, it was definitely not day 2 because day 2 and the draw games are super shallow. So no, only like an hour or 2. So no, I actually played that one.
So what do you think is, like, Nick, the biggest thing for no limit hold'em players trying to make the transition to mixed games, or like what's kind of the big kind of jump that a lot of players have to make, or that hurdle that they have to get through? I remember for me, it was I didn't think they were profitable or I'd win at them, which it took like time, but I don't think that anymore, you know. But
yeah, I guess it's all what your goal is, and I know you're more of a cash game player. I'm kind of more of a tournament player. So my big thing of wanting to get into mixed games was just the pace of the way that, or the transition that No Limit was going through, and the pace of play. So it just wasn't very fun for me anymore. So when I started playing 8-game, it kind of got you into everything. So yeah, once I started playing the 8-game tournaments, and even 8-game cash games are great, but 8-game tournaments is really what got me into mixed games. And maybe they're not hugely profitable, but maybe you have to, if you play 2-5, you'll have to find a small mixed game to start, or if you just want to take a shot at a 1,500 at the World Series, if that's in your bankroll. But maybe you have to move down to stakes. But for me, it was just more fun to play mixed games, and putting in a lot of work to no limits not very fun for me, as opposed to mixed games. Putting in a lot of work in mixed games is much more enjoyable.
You got tired of waiting 5 minutes between each hand to
exactly.
Or off
Exactly. Even limit hold'em is a fast-paced game. And actually, one of the first mixed game tournaments I played was the 3K limit hold'em 6 max, and I cashed out the very first time I played it. But that's a really fun tournament just because of pace of play and everything. But yeah, mixed game players are much faster.
I think we might have some hope on that front in the hold'em arena. I know it's a mixed podcast, but with I'm seeing more shot clocks and I'm seeing more big blind antes.
Yeah.
Just there seems to be some effort to try and help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the majority of rec players aren't having fun anymore, and that's exactly why they're trying to do it.
For sure. Yeah, Mike is our kind of resident hold'em player. He's
guru.
Yeah, he's kind of looked over the hills at the mixed games a little bit, but he hasn't quite crossed over.
Gotcha.
Even though he does a mixed game podcast.
I'm playing a little bit.
He's playing. He's
playing more mixed
them
than I have
sure.
lately.
You've definitely been very willing to play them. In fact, I would say you're exactly where I was at when I was just starting to play them. I was open to it, but I wasn't this is the way to go. Where at some point I kind of just broke through and was oh my goodness, my life is drastically improved by doing this,
Yeah. So Nick, okay, this is gonna be a selfish question. So what was the biggest strategy hurdle for you to get over coming from hold'em to mixed games? Maybe it's different for PLO compared to the draw games, but what was the big strategy difference that you had to adjust to that just was the toughest for you? Or maybe a concept that was way different or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's more difficult, but at the same time, it's can be easier if you figure out how to do it. I was going to say, lots of times, especially in the big buy-in mixed games, guys, they're pretty tricky, but they play a lot closer to correct, as opposed to if you play a huge 1,500 no limit event at the World Series, you're adjusting to, is this guy a pro? Is this guy a guy who plays once a year, whatever? But even the majority of 1,500 players, if you're playing a Deuce tournament at the World Series, they're going to play pretty correctly. Especially 10Ks they're all world-class players. So it's difficult, but at the same time, you can, they're really tricky, but they play more, I guess, GTO. So you can, sometimes if you're trying to play GTO in no limit and other players aren't playing how they're supposed to play, then you can't technically play, or you can't really play GTO. So it's more difficult to play against world-class players, but at the same time, they're tricky, but most of them play more standard correctly, I guess.
So if you're the type of hold'em player that you rather play against people who know what they're doing, then maybe try mixed games, or that happens more often.
Yeah.
There's something to be said about that predictability. I don't want to say predictability because obviously it's kind of selling great players short, but I feel do you think that there are probably more moves you can make or more things that you can do with a stronger field that kind of like in hold'em that you wouldn't be able to do in a field that had a lot of rec players or a lot of players who just didn't know what they were doing?
Yeah, I was actually kind of listening to Adam earlier talk about this is why they should fold, this is why you can snow. And I was thinking, if people don't understand why you're snowing, if people don't understand why you have blockers, similar to no limit, if people are just aimlessly bluffing and they're not repping anything, then you can't get a bad player to fold. And it's kind of similar concept in Deuce, to where, you're showing you have blockers, then you can't get bad players to fold, I guess.
Right.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, definitely. There's still adjustments to make. There's still exploitative adjustments all over the place in Deuce, but I still always, from my perspective, start kind of where the baseline is, and then to navigate from there to what would be the optimal play, like the exploitative play in a certain situation versus certain opponent.
Yeah, and I guess that's one thing better players is they're not going to be exploited as much because they're balanced, and at the same time, they're going to exploit you on your mistakes. So they play more correctly, which you can adjust to, or you should know how to play correctly. But at the same time, if you make any mistakes, they're going to exploit you much more than a no limit rec player would.
That's a good point.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, against tough players, you definitely want to know like how to protect all your lines and ranges, and yeah, you don't want them to be able to tell what you're doing. That's for sure. And so definitely in those 15, even the 1500 events, I'd say I had a really tough day one table in the 1500 event, but then later on I realized how many like super soft players were still in that field though.
Yeah.
It was like they just were looking for an event to jump in. And yeah. So from your perspective, what do you think is some of the softer fields? Like, so for a newer mixed game player who's wanting to get in a bracelet event, a 1500 event, what do you think is one of the, or maybe a couple of the more softer fields that are good for players?
For sure,
jump in?
actually the 8 game, 1500 8 game was the one that first got me into it. 1500 horse usually has a pretty big field, so that one's not too bad either. I'm trying to think. 1500 deuce is mostly tough, but there's some spots in that too. And then I was telling you earlier, it's a big bad game, but 1500 PLO gets like 1,000 runners every year, which is crazy. And there's a lot of spots in that. Yeah. So even I would say the 1500 PLO 8's even softer than 1500 PLO because
People
it was
like to get
interesting.
that
Yeah.
one. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Now, they rolled out some smaller buy-in tournaments, obviously, on the Hold'em side. I think they had rolled some out, maybe one or two on the PLO side, too, right? Maybe like a $500 or $1,000 buy-in PLO bracelet event last couple of years.
Yeah, they've had 1K PLO for a long time. But, yeah, I think they have maybe like a 600 and a 500 PLO as well now. But, yeah, they've had the 1K and 1,500 price point for PLO for a while.
Got to get in there. Get that bracelet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so got me thinking though, just talking about pulling up a photo here on my phone.
So Nick, can we see it? Do you have the bracelet on you?
I'm not wearing it, but 1 sec, I'll grab it. It's a shot. Trying to think of the
Treat for all of our podcast viewers. There you go. It's what it looks like.
The auction is open, ladies and gentlemen. Get your bids in.
It says event number as well.
Awesome.
Oh, it does say the event number. That's very cool. Do they change the design year after year?
I think so. This is the only one, unfortunately, that I have, so I couldn't tell you for sure, but I think so.
Well, we'll do this again next year, and we'll ask you about your second one.
Sounds great.
Speaking of soft fields, I got some photos here of Nick from last summer.
Oh, man.
There's Nick and Brian Rast and Ogranu, Freddie Deeb.
Oh, that's all.
Yeah, Ivy.
Pretty standard fields.
Just the used field and the 10K horse.
Yeah, all been there.
Super soft field.
Holy moly!
Yeah, did you rub shoulders with any of the poker celebrities? What was that like?
Yeah, I mean they're mostly all guys, all good guys. It's pretty much the same guys in all the 10K mixes, but yeah, they're all pretty nice. And it was odd, like I would think that I'd be more starstruck, but the only situation that was pretty cool that Adam was referring to was the only time I played with Ivy was in that 10K horse. He was actually on my left for the majority of the horse. That was pretty cool. Yeah,
that's
I played in the Grania a bunch of times, and it's not really a big thing. And Helmuth and all those guys, and they're just like chop, 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 chop. But Ivy didn't say a word for hours. I mean, he's a perfectly nice guy, but didn't say a word for hours. That was pretty cool.
Now, you mentioned everyone being like a really nice, cool individual, but what about your beefs, though? I mean, certainly you have like players.
No, I won't go there.
I'll tell you off.
Dirt.
I'll tell you when we're off stream.
I'm kidding.
I'll say when I won my tournament, some people weren't very happy, but I didn't really have a beef with them. But
Right.
I kind of think they had a beef with me. I won't name any names, but when I won my tournament, some people were not very happy about it.
Was there a lot of talk of beginner's luck?
Yes.
Not that
Let them hate.
And yeah, exactly. It's okay.
That's just
It's all
jealousy
good.
talking. That's just jealousy
Exactly.
talking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know who seemed really cool though at your final table, and I thought he played really well, was Andrulis. He seemed
Oh,
like
yeah.
he was a nice guy.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
for him, he was
There's
like
this-
coming down from playing like 1K, 2K
Yeah.
cash games, so
Yeah.
he was just there to have fun and try to
Yeah.
win a bracelet. I think
Yeah. Yeah.
he
Yeah,
didn't
my whole
seem
final
to,
table was pretty fun.
yeah, he didn't seem to take it so seriously, and
No.
he definitely seemed like a cool character.
Well, I mean,
No,
it was
yeah.
only 5 big blinds for him. The whole tournament.
There you go.
Right,
Interesting way to look at it. Yeah.
5 big,
Very true.
5 big bets.
Yeah.
We got a question in the chat too for you though.
Okay.
Jeff Newton's asking, what is your favorite mixed game to play and why?
Ooh.
Like which variant, I guess, is what he's wanting to know.
I guess I'll go with Deuce just because it's worked out best for me.
Yeah.
Deuce and yeah, even recently for big bets, I've really liked PLO 8 tournaments, and again, I'm not supposed to play tournaments, but I would say Deuce just because it's been best to me, and I really got into it. But I also really enjoy PLO 8.
Those two are my favorite as well.
Yeah.
I like Badusi a lot.
Yeah, Deuce is fun. Yeah, it'd be cool. Cool if they had some of those. I mean, they're in dealer's choice, but other than that, there's no standalone Badusi, Badugi, Badasi.
But you play the stud games a lot too, right?
Yeah, I used to really after 2018, I really liked the stud games, but recently I've been liking them less. I don't know, just the the pace of action and just the a lot of stud decisions are a lot more straightforward, so it's not quite as much critical thinking. So I really like the studs when I first started playing 8 game and all the mix. And I would say of stud high, stud 8, and Raz, stud 8 is my favorite. But I've recently started liking more of the big bet games along with Deuce.
Yeah. I kind of like the stud games in a mix, but I never want to sit there and play stud just
Yeah.
on its own.
Yeah.
Horse
Yeah.
I can do. I like horse.
Yeah, that's what's so fun about 8 game or 10 game mixes is that you're mixing up all the time, and especially in tournament strategies changing so significantly, you know, going from stud games with antes to Deuce to no limit games and everything. So that's why the 8 games, especially in tournaments, are so fun, is because strategy changes so significantly all the time.
Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
I've noticed that getting into playing some mixed games more, like those mixed tournaments and stuff, are there's a big fun element to it. Just the fact that it changes, the pace changes, the strategy changes. Sometimes easier to not. Maybe same for you. I find it easier to like get out of a rut. You know, maybe you get frustrated. You know, maybe you're playing Hold'em for 5 hours and you just run bad, and then you just get in a bad rut. But whereas if you're playing a mix, you're like, oh, it's a new game. You know.
Yeah.
It's a new
Yeah,
chance.
and I'll speak for myself, I guess, but I would think that most players have a favorite game too. So they're like, oh, I'm just waiting for this game, you know, dragging along, or you know, maybe they have 3 favorite games. So, but yeah, it definitely changes it up, and there's a lot more thought process when you're having to think about the next game. I always remember myself and like 2 or 3 other people at the table, like, you know, you would think by, you know, day 2, day 3, you would remember the rotation, but you're always looking at the plaques like, what's the next game again? What's the next game again? Like, what's the game after this?
I was just wondering how many times have you had any big spots where you forgot which game you were playing?
I've definitely done that in stud before. Yes, I've done that in stud games before.
So
You think
I
it's
think
easier
there-
to do that online though? Because I think everybody's playing. We kind of got a lot of us that have gotten into mixed games and have been playing quite a bit during the pandemic. Do you think it's easier to do that online, make those mistakes where you don't realize the game change?
Yeah,
I don't know what it is. They put it on the table, and then live they put the placard in front of you. I mean, but it does
Yeah.
seem to be like online, you're not even looking. Maybe it's multi-tabling. If you
Yeah.
multi-table, that's how it's happening.
yeah, maybe.
You're cooking dinner or something and you don't think about it, and PLO becomes PLO 8. And yeah. Now, as someone, Nick, who has played a ton of different variants, what would you? I know we talked about your favorite variant, but what would you say is the most different, most unique? You know, maybe the weirdest variant that you've played in one of these big mixes before.
Ooh, weirdest. They play some pretty odd games in the cash games. I couldn't even. I mean, to people who don't play the drama hall, Adam knows the drama hall games are pretty different. And and then they play like they play Raz. It's like Deuce to 7 Raz as opposed to Ace to 5 with a Doogie too. So you're playing Deuce to 7 Raz Doogie, and all these different variants I just want to think of. But as far as regular mix in like an 8 game, Raz is a different game, and I guess I would say the guys who are really good at Raz are way above other players because situations that you can rep in Raz are kind of different situations than you can rep in high or high low, because in high low, it's gonna be multi-way, people are drawing to both sides, but in Raz, especially when you're pairing or other people are pairing and situations like that, I would say Raz is kind of its own league of players where guys who are good at Raz are really good at it.
Really good at it, yeah. I like Raz a lot.
I do too. I actually find that to be a fun one. I haven't had many opportunities to play it. That's I find that to be a fun one.
Yeah, Raz is a good one.
Any more questions for Nick? Anything in the chat? I haven't seen anything in the chat.
Well, thanks a lot for coming on with us, Nick.
Awesome, dude. Yeah, thank you so much.
Of course, guys. I appreciate it.
And you're definitely welcome back. Maybe you can come on for a little coaching sometime. Tell us what we're doing wrong.
Oh yeah. Okay.
We love to hear what we're doing wrong over here.
Yeah, good to meet you, Nick.
Play and explain.
Good to meet you, Nick. Hopefully see you out in Vegas when that's a thing again.
Sounds great, guys. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for joining, Nick.
All right. See you guys.
Bye, Nick. Well,
very awesome.
There you go, fellas.
The great Nick Seiken, ladies and gentlemen. Finally meeting him for the first time. I've obviously heard of him and, I've talked to him just briefly online once or twice, but as a very cool cat and obviously very, very good at the game of poker. So
I'm sure you'll get to meet him at some point. You're going to come to Vegas with me, right?
At some point. It may not be this year, but definitely next summer. I'm already looking at Airbnbs, getting the baller pads.
Yeah, every time I talk to Nick, I think that's just what I think about. Like, okay, Vegas, let's make a plan. Let's get Airbnb. Let's get an Airbnb lined up for the fall, and it's only June.
Right.
Well, guys, you can tell he has such an enthusiasm for the game. It's really fun.
Yeah, for sure. I think next week will be a fun one too. We'll do a giveaway. Mike made a really cool clip with some edits. I love how you trimmed that thing down, and I looked at the clip, and there's some really good hands. So next week I think will be a fun one too, where we can drill into strategy and the lines and play and explains and stuff. So that'll be fun.
Looking forward to it.
Good stuff.
Well, I guess it was just a bad day today with all the technical difficulties. Maybe there's something going on in the world. I don't know. It's like something's off right now.
Yeah, planets are misaligned. But
our technical difficulties, I think, are small potatoes. So everybody stay safe out there. Let's be good neighbors. Let's talk stuff out.
Love instead of hate, folks. Love instead of hate.
That's the word. All right. Well, that's about all we got. That's it for this episode. We'll see you next week. And as always, the jig is up.